Back then, school didn't really ask how you were feeling. It didn't check in. There were no emotional temperature checks or mindfulness moments. It simply began. You turned up, usually a few minutes before you were meant to. You sat down, often on a cold, hard floor or a splintery bench, and you just got on with it. There was an unspoken agreement between you, the building, and the institution itself. The day was going to happen, whether you felt like it or not. School wasn't a conversation. It was a statement, a fact of life. Like rain or the 6 o'clock news, you were there to learn. And that was the beginning and the end of the arrangement. Nobody expected a welcome party. The welcome was the gate being unlocked. Before the bell, the playground was a world of its own. It was loud, an unfiltered symphony of shrieks, laughter, and the rhythmic thud of a football against a brick wall. It was largely unsupervised. A teacher might be vaguely present, a distant figure sipping tea from a staff room window, but the law of the yard was enforced by the children themselves. And it was, let's be honest, mildly dangerous. Games had no written rules, just consequences. A game of tag could escalate into a full-blown manhunt across the entire premises. Skipping ropes weren't just for skipping. They were for accidental trips and spectacular falls. British Bulldog was less a game and more a controlled riot. Your knees were perpetually scuffed, your shoes were worn down, and you learned the physics of a skidding stop on wet concrete very, very quickly. It was a social experiment with no safety net. Then the bell rang, and when that bell went, everything stopped. Instantly, it was a sound that sliced through the chaos with absolute authority. One moment, the playground was a swirling vortex of energy. The next, a frozen tableau. Footballs dropped mid-kick. Conversations died in the middle of a word. It was an incredible display of conditioned response. There was no countdown, no 5-minute warning, just the piercing shriek of the bell, or sometimes the even more alarming blast of a teacher's whistle. Suddenly, teachers would appear from doorways you didn't even know existed, materializing like wardens. Lines formed without instruction, a silent, shuffling migration into perfectly straight rows. Talking ceased. The playground's brief, chaotic republic was over. Order was restored. The business of school was about to begin. Every classroom had a smell. It was a unique, unchanging aroma that, even decades later, can transport you right back. It was a complex blend. The dominant note was chalk dust, a dry, mineral scent that hung in the air and coated every surface. Then there was the smell of damp wool from coats drying on pegs near a radiator, releasing that distinct wet sheep fragrance into the room. And underneath it all, something else. Something unidentifiable. A mixture of floor polish, pencil shavings, faint disinfectant, and maybe the ghost of 1,000 packed lunches. The windows, heavy and framed in painted wood, only ever opened a few inches, held ajar by a metal stay. They didn't let much air in, but they were excellent at letting the heat out. The huge, cast iron radiators that lined the walls worked when they felt like it. They were either stone cold or radiating a heat so fierce you couldn't sit near them. The classroom wasn't just a room, it was an atmosphere, and at the heart of that atmosphere was the chalk. Chalk dust coated everything. It was on your hands, under your fingernails, it settled on the shoulders of your jumper. You breathed it in. After a long day, you felt like you were personally smuggling a small quarry out of the school. Whiteboards and dry markers were a distant, futuristic fantasy, something you might see in an American film. Our world was one of blackboards, or occasionally green boards, and the humble stick of chalk. A good teacher could wield a piece of chalk with the precision of a surgeon. A less patient teacher might use it as a projectile, aimed with surprising accuracy at the head of a daydreaming student. The squeak of chalk on the board was a sound that could set your teeth on edge, and the satisfying thwack of the wooden-backed duster against the wall outside was the official sound of a lesson ending. Then came dinner time, an experience less about cuisine and more about survival. School dinners were not optional. You didn't get a choice, you got a tray. And on that tray, you were given what you were given. There was no discussion. Lumpy mash would appear without explanation, served with an ice cream scoop. Gravy was a thin, mysterious brown liquid. The meat was often grey and of indeterminate origin, and the pudding was frequently a shade of pink, not found in nature, usually accompanied by a thick, skin-topped custard that wobbled with a life of its own. You didn't complain. Complaining was a rookie error. It drew attention, and attention was the last thing you wanted. You simply adapted. You developed strategies. Hide the lumpy bits under the fork. Trade your sponge cake for a friend's biscuit. Or just eat as fast as you could before you had time to properly taste it. It was a lesson in resilience. If dinner time was survival, PE was public humiliation. Forgetting your PE kit was a common occurrence, but it solved nothing. In fact, it made things worse. There was no, "I'll just sit this one out." Oh no, the punishment was simple and universally applied. You did PE in your vest and pants, bare feet on the cold, dusty floor of the school gym, standing in a line with 20 other children, feeling the draft. Nobody questioned this. Not the teachers, not the parents, and certainly not the children. It was just the way things were. The gym itself was a chamber of horrors. Towering climbing ropes you could never quite conquer, wooden benches that were perfect for getting splinters, and the dreaded horse, a piece of apparatus that seemed designed purely to cause injury, whether it was country dancing, gymnastics, or a freezing game of hockey on a muddy field. PE was an exercise in awkwardness. The teachers back then were different. They weren't your friends. They weren't trying to be approachable or relatable. They were figures of authority, and they commanded respect. Sometimes they were feared. Often it was a mixture of both. They had a presence that could silence a room with a single glance. They didn't negotiate, they instructed. And perhaps the most powerful tool in their arsenal was the fact that they knew your parents. This wasn't just a casual acquaintance. They might see your dad in the pub or your mum at the butcher's. This created a terrifying, inescapable network of accountability. There was no hiding. An issue at school would inevitably make its way home, often before you did. Your teacher wasn't just an educator. They were an extension of the community's watchful eye, ensuring you stayed firmly in line. And then, just like that, it was over. The final bell rang, and a torrent of children would spill out of the gates. Once you left the school grounds, you vanished. There were no tracking apps, no mobile phones to check in. Your parents had a vague idea of when you were supposed to arrive home, but there was a generous margin of error. The walk home was your own time. You might stop at the sweet shop, detour through the park, or just dawdle with your friends, kicking a stone all the way down the street. You arrived home eventually. Maybe your tea was cold. Maybe you got a mild telling off. But there wasn't the panic or the constant contact that exists today. It was a small, daily pocket of freedom, a brief adventure in the fading light before you had to be back in time for tea. Looking back, school wasn't gentle. It wasn't designed to nurture your delicate spirit. But it was simple. The rules were clear. The consequences were immediate, and the expectations were straightforward. You learned, you coped with the strange food and the cold gyms, and you just carried on. There was a robustness to it all, a sense that you were being prepared for a world that wasn't always going to be comfortable or accommodating. And somehow, in its own strange, unforgiving way, it worked. It made us resilient. It made us self-reliant. It made us who we are today. If you remember school like this, if you recall the smell of chalk and the taste of pink custard, you're definitely among friends here. Thanks for taking this trip back with me. Don't forget to share your own school memories in the comments below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time on Back Then Britain.